The first question, which was submitted by the League, goes to Mr. Duff first. And it is, what do you think voters are looking for in an elected official? Please tell us about the specific qualifications that you have that make you that person.
Thank you, and thanks to the League for hosting the debate tonight and for everybody who came out tonight. I want to thank my wife Tracy, my two boys, and my family and friends for coming out here tonight as well, and all of you for being at this debate. I think what voters are looking for is, this year especially, is someone who can actually talk about their record, talk about what they've done, and have a vision for the future. I think most folks are extremely unhappy with the tone and tenor of the presidential race. And what they're looking for in candidates, especially for more local office, are folks who will generally speak positive about their vision for the future, not about negativity and not about tearing somebody down. So I think that if when I talk to voters and they say what they're interested in, obviously they're interested in jobs, they're interested in the economy, they're interested in their quality of life, but they want to hear about what vision a particular candidate has for the future rather than what the other person is not doing. So I think that there are great opportunities for us to talk about our vision and ways in which we can differentiate ourselves from the tone and tenor of the presidential election.
Okay, Mr. Ellers?
Thank you very much. This over here. And I want to thank the League, and I want to thank everybody that's shown up tonight. It's an honor to be here, including my children and all my friends. So with respect to what voters are looking for, you know, I've spent the last 6 months out knocking on doors and talking to the voters. Some of you are here tonight. And on the doors that I've knocked on and the people that I've talked to and got to spend some time with, a lot of great folks. It's accountability, it's transparency, and it's predictability. That's what the voters are looking for. They're looking for accountability from their leadership. They're looking for transparency with respect to what actually our money is being spent on and what it's actually doing for the citizens right here in Norwalk. And they're looking for predictability. We've too many times in the last 6 years found ourselves in positions where we're given a budget and that budget isn't accurate. And the accuracy of the budget causes people to reassess things 12 months later. Shortfalls with respect to hospitals, with respect to nonprofits, with respect to businesses and the fees that have to be increased to be able to make up for the shortfalls in the budget. So predictability is a critical issue that people are looking for. So when I look at what my qualifications are, I've been in business for a long time. I've had to manage people, I've had to manage money of my own that I've had in business, and it's important to have transparency, predictability, and accountability. And those are the things that our voters are looking for, and I believe that I can bring those to the citizens of Norwalk.
Any rebuttal? Any rebuttal? Okay. The next question will go to Mr. Ellers first. Assume that the Supreme Court upholds Judge Mukosher's, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce that, decision.
That's a great name to say 3 times fast.
Yeah, exactly. That could fundamentally reshape public education in Connecticut. The judge ordered the state to make changes in several areas, including how schools are financed and how teachers are evaluated. Do you agree with the judge's decision? Why or why not? And then a follow-up question, which I will get to after we do the first one. Do you agree? Why or why not?
And that was just specifically on 2 points?
It could deal with any part. It wasn't limited.
Of the ruling?
Any part of the ruling.
Well, I think, and I haven't read the full 185 pages. I've read specific parts of it, so forgive me if I miss a point that's important to somebody or that I get put upon missing it. But the real issue with the ruling is the following. It said on pages 28 to 31 that we quit using the ECS funding calculation in 2013. So we weren't even using the formula the last few years. And that in and of itself is a critical element, because if this gets overturned, there's a great chance when we redo the ruling that it affects this town negatively with respect to the ECS funding. What I would say about the ECS funding and the legislation overall is that it needs to be addressed immediately. We can't wait for the ruling to come back. We've got to go ahead and rework the ECS formula, because our town specifically here in Norwalk, this town, is being shortchanged with respect to the ECS funding, in my opinion.
All right, Mr. Duff?
Thank you. And as I said, when the judge's ruling came out, Judge McAllister's ruling, was that this was really a clarion call for us to fix what is really a flawed formula that many of us recognize has been that way for a long time. But let me just give you my background. I've been fifth generation Norwalker. I went to the public schools. My children are in the public schools. I was a long-term substitute teacher and a realtor in town for 20 years. So I feel like I have a vested interest in our educational system here in this city. And obviously, bringing back funding for Norwalk with educational cost sharing, priority school money, school construction grants, and other types of ways in which we support schools is very important. Generally, education funding has always been a bipartisan issue, and those of us in the Norwalk and Stanford delegations have worked together to increase funding. Now, with that said, it has always been very difficult because we have high grant lists, and that has always kind of put us on the lower end of where we really need to be. Though I will say that I've worked very hard over the years to increase funding, not only educational cost sharing, but also priority school money, and again, finding other ways in which to help local property taxpayers and help support our schools. With regard to the ruling that Judge McAllister made, the CGF lawsuit was really basically about increasing funding to the tune of about $2.5 billion in additional money for state education funding. He rejected that. He said you need to now work within the current system on how to do that. He also said, Grant said that the manner in which the existing levels of funding is distributed needs to change. The standards for graduation and grade level promotion, the way certain student benefits from special education funding, and process for evaluating the performance of teachers needs to be addressed. None of those things were in the CGF lawsuit. So, I'll use my rebuttal time.
When the time comes. Mr. Ellis, do you want to do any rebuttal or any extension on this one?
I'll let Bob go ahead and
all right, another
finish
30
his
seconds.
point.
Thank you. So those are the things that were in the ruling that were not part of the original lawsuit. So I do think that, and I've said this publicly twice now, at least through statements, is that this is an opportunity for the legislature, no matter what happens with the Attorney General and his appeal to the state Supreme Court. This is an opportunity for legislators to come together with the governor and others and come together with a formula that will work for our children all across the state and help cities like Norwalk and Stanford get to a fair funding level.
All right, that's time. If there's nothing further on that question, I want to go to something completely different. This one goes to Mr. Duff first. How do you plan to pay for our crumbling infrastructure?
That's a great question. We have been working very hard over the last 5-6 years to invest in our transportation plan. We have a $100 billion Let's Go CT transportation plan that will finally invest money into roads, bridges, trains, buses, and have an integrated transportation system. I think for far too long, we have not invested. As a matter of fact, we've invested more over the last 6 years than we have in the previous 20 years. And that's being shown in the work that is being done locally with regard to some of the bigger projects here in our community and through Southwest Connecticut, through our new rail cars, through new buses, and doubling the amount of money that we put into the town aid road for municipalities. Norwalk has done a great job in repaving a lot of roads. Some of that money is through state grants through the town aid road. So we need to look at all those things and finally invest in it. We're not going to grow jobs and grow our economy if you don't have a good transportation network. When I talk to CEOs of large businesses and small businesses, transportation and access to transportation and working around traffic issues is extremely important to having a productive workforce, obviously. So having transportation and investing in transportation and not ignoring it any longer is something that is paramount to growing jobs in this state.
Okay, Mr. Ellers?
Well, I think the transportation issue is one that we sit here and scratch our heads. Why is it 2016 and we're dealing with infrastructure issues that we should have been dealing with for quite some time? I think Fairfield County in and of itself was shortchanged with the stimulus back in 2008, and we can't go back and look at the past, but we have to understand that the methodology for which money is being allocated for transportation in this state is finally starting to come to this area to some degree. I question it if it's enough. The Republican Party, we talked about this yesterday, has a $76 billion Get Connecticut Going transportation bill that's fully funded. Cuts some of the allocations that the governor has with respect to bonding that he currently has. It keeps the education bonding at $500 million constant. Still gives the governor $100 million, so you could spend $600 million on schools. In 2014, the state only spent $340 million as a indication on where the bonding took place. So we've put up a plan on the Republican side. Everything has holes in it, but this doesn't cost anybody any more money. The $100 billion plan that's put up by the governor, it needs to raise money. It needs fees, it needs taxes. We've seen it, and it's stealth tax, maybe through the mileage tax that's still in play in the state. Higher gas taxes. We have to understand where the funding for the $100 billion project comes from. The Republican plan was $76 billion, and it was fully funded, and again I say keeps the education bonding at $500 million and gives the governor $100 million if he thinks he needs to put another $100 towards schools. So I think there's an opportunity out there. The Republicans have one. It hasn't been brought. It hasn't been be able to be brought to the floor with respect to a vote, and hopefully next year it will be able to.
All right, any rebuttal?
Yeah, I would just say that obviously these projects are extremely important to us. When you think about funding the Merit 7 train station improvements there that will actually put a bridge up to the Merit 7 office complex, the Merit 7 Route 7, the Merit Parkway Route 7 interchange that is extremely important. The project that I worked on for years, which finally is done, the I-95 exit 1415 project. The other projects like Walk Bridge and other infrastructure things like Yankee Doodle Bridge and others that are extremely important.
Anything further? All right. This next question is a follow-up. It was touched on already. It goes to Mr. Ellers first. What is your opinion on using a mileage tax to finance infrastructure repairs? Should we do it? Why or why not?
Well, I am adamantly against the mileage tax. We already pay enough taxes when we drive. The mileage tax is great political football that will be an interesting question back to Bob, but it was $300,000 that was in the budget. And Department of Transportation can always say they had the allocation to spend the money however they chose. The fact of the matter is it was brought up in the special session to remove the mileage tax, and it wasn't taken out. So anything that has in a pilot program and a study, there's a possibility that it happens. I'm adamantly against it. I know Bob says he's against it, but it didn't come out of the budget. So I think you have to assume going forward that the mileage tax with the state of our economy, state of our budget is clearly on the table, and we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Mr. Duff?
Thank you. I made a very strong statement back in 2015 and another one back this year, 2016, that said that I was opposed to the mileage tax and that it would never come up to a vote as long as I'm Majority Leader of the Senate.
All right. Anything further on mileage tax? I have a request from a couple of people in the back of the room. If you guys can move the mics closer to where you're sitting because they're still having trouble picking up your voices. I would also like to make a request to the members of the audience. I will not ask a question that cannot be answered equally by both candidates. I am not Chris Wallace aiming things at one or the other. Right. So please, if you have questions, put them in a way that both candidates have a shot at answering. The other thing I should say is a couple of questions talk about municipal affairs. These men are running for state office. Think about that when you write your questions.
At least we got out of those.
All right. A very specific question. This one is going to go to Mr. Duff first. In these challenging financial times, we have seen reductions in Care for Kids, a subsidy that helps working families pay for child care so that they can work. How do you propose to continue helping working families with young children?
Well, I think that with our budget, we've had to make very tough decisions, many of which are painful and ones that people don't want to make. We have worked really hard to mitigate many of those cuts that are out there, and we're going to continue to do that. I think Care for Kids, which has been moved over from the Department of Social Services to the Office of Early Childhood, now is on a better path than it had been prior with under the previous office that it was in. So I would just say that we need to make sure that we're getting folks to work, and supporting Care for Kids is very important. That being said, that when you are faced with tough decisions, you have to make those decisions, but you try and make those decisions in a way that doesn't harm one particular area more than it would another social service area. So for example, we don't want to preserve one area and then harm, say, seniors' health care. If we're making cuts, some of those cuts need to be fairly across the board. And I think we have worked hard in the legislature. When we've had budgets presented to us, the legislature has taken a lot of time to listen to the public, to make decisions, working together and making decisions and mitigating some of those painful cuts and decisions that we ultimately had to make.
Mr. Ehlers?
Well, the specific of Care for Kids, it's heartbreaking to see the cuts in that area, but I think it really speaks to a little bit larger issue than just Care for Kids or the cuts that we've seen for mental health or for opioid. It comes down to the fact that we aren't, in this current time, putting together budgets that are predictable. We promised this money back when the budget was initially passed. It was called the Budget for the Future, the single greatest budget ever passed in Connecticut. The cuts came a year later. We had to cut $1 billion. That's the issue that we're all frustrated with. That's the issue of accountability. That's the issue of transparency, and that's the issue of predictability. We can't promise something and then 12 months later go, gee whiz, we don't have the money now. It comes down to the fact that we don't run this state and we don't budget correctly to allow people to understand this is what you're going to get and this is what we have. We've promised something and then we're forced to cut it. And that is where the real issue and why I'm in this race. I'm in this race because we need to have that. The people's doors that I knock on that are facing these issues, being laid off from the hospital, losing the Care for Kids, they're frustrated. And they're frustrated because a year ago, they didn't think this was going to happen. That's the problem that we face with the current Democratic leadership in Hartford. And that's why I'm in this race.
Okay, any rebuttal?
Sure. I would certainly say that I understand everybody's frustration, but tough times call for difficult decisions, and when we're faced with an economy that is much different than it was prior to 2008, and we need to respond to those kinds of changes that are out there. I will say that my friends on the other side of the aisle never put forth their budget for a vote. And if they're so confident in what they think they can do, and they're so confident in their numbers, why not put it up for a vote? That's not something that they did, and I question the validity of their numbers.
Any rebuttal?
Well, the Republicans put up 5 specific budgets. The last budget, 5-year budget.com, was scored by outside agencies, the media, the editorial boards, and it was seen as good. It never got a vote on the floor. So I would challenge that vehemently, and that's factually incorrect.
Okay.
Can I respond back?
All right, I'll give each of you another 30 seconds if you want it.
As the guy who runs the floor of the Senate, I can tell you that the budget could have been brought up for a vote as an amendment by the Republicans. It never was. In fact, it was actually $145 million out of balance with a $450 million cut to higher education. So it wasn't even put online until 3 days after our initial budget vote that we took at the end of session. So that's the facts, and that's the reality, is that it was never brought up for a vote, it was never even put in,
Okay.
and it was out
Sorry.
of balance.
All right, anything further?
No.
All right. Next question will go to Mr. Ellers first. Half of Connecticut's residents surveyed by the Gallup organization say they would leave the state if they could. If elected, what would you do to make Connecticut more attractive to its residents, especially the elderly?
Thank you. That's part of the new economic reality we hear about. When we hear new economic reality, and we're still talking about 2008, we knew 3 years later the financial service industry was dead. It was gone. But we didn't believe it, or our leadership didn't believe it. So what's the reality? We have to get rid of and the other side of the aisle for the first time ever has said we're interested in removing the tax on Social Security, which we have in this state. We need to remove the pension tax on this state. So if you get if you get a pension, if you get Social Security, we tax you. That's ridiculous. That takes people out of the state. Our property taxes are high because our budgets are out of whack, and the municipal level here, they're forced to raise taxes because they're not getting as much money. And our seniors are having a difficult time with that. I've heard that numerous times over the last few months. So with respect to 49% of the people leaving, we need predictability, and we need to do something specifically, as I mentioned, remove the seniors tax on Social Security, which the other side of the aisle for the first time in the last 12 months has been amenable to, and up to a level, say, I don't know what the number would be, 100,000 with respect to pensions. Don't tax that either. We're taxing people again, and that's just not right. You can move to New York and that doesn't happen to you. We're only one of 13 states that does that. It's unacceptable, and we need to keep our seniors here because we've already got enough houses for sale. We don't need the rest of them leaving.
Well, of course, we don't want anybody to move out. We want to make sure that seniors are here and they're here with their families. I will say that here in Norwalk, I see a lot of people moving into the state. I see apartments that are being rented out as fast as they can be built, we have a lot of new young people coming in, and that they are here because there's a lot of good jobs that are in Norwalk as well. But I will say that for me anyway, what I've been working to do over the years is to help senior citizens in a number of different ways. One of which is an area that I have been focused on for a number of years, which is sales tax sharing. That actually brings back a portion of the sales tax to the municipalities. Norwalk is receiving about $2 million, a little bit more for that this year, which has helped to keep the property tax increase to the lowest it's ever been at 0.46%. That is where, when you hear from seniors, you hear that the tax that drives a lot of them out of the area are property taxes. And that is something that we need to continue to work on. I don't think this is the end-all, be-all, but it is certainly something that is important for us to continue to address, which are property taxes, especially for our seniors. One of the other areas that I have worked very hard on is exempting pensions, federal pensions for veterans. If they have a federal pension, that they're no longer be subject to state income tax. So all these things are step-by-step processes. I've said for many years that I thought we should be reducing taxes for seniors on their pensions and other areas as well. But things are step-by-step. You can't do one thing on one side and then say you want another thing on the other side. You've got to balance out the ledger, and you've got to make sure that you are keeping services that they need. And at the same time, we're also been making sure we have investments in senior housing, which is why I was very proud to announce $7 million for the Marvin and for Ludlow for very important renovations there. Seniors live there, and we need to make sure we're investing in them as well.
Time. Anything further?
Yeah. What Bob mentions about what's taking place is great. The fact of the matter is, seniors are still struggling and leaving, and 49% of the people want to leave. It has everything to do with the fact we're lacking in accountability, predictability, and transparency. The seniors get it. We need change, and that change needs to come with a better plan, and that plan requires adjustments to what seniors have to pay. What's been done is great. It's clearly not enough.
Okay, anything further? All right, this question goes to Mr. Duff first. What should Connecticut do about its underfunded pensions? Would you favor renegotiating the contracts with the state's employee unions?
Okay, that's a great question, because that's exactly what we've been doing the last 6 years. For the first time ever, we've actually been fully funding our pension obligations to the tune of over $1.2 billion per year. We have 4 tiers of state employees in Connecticut. We have Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 2A, Tier 3. Tier 2, Tier 2A, and Tier 3 are 92 to 96% funded, which I think everybody would agree was pretty good. Tier 1, which ended in 1984, is really the albatross around us. We still have about 1,800 workers who are currently employed under Tier 1. We have most of the rest of them are retirees. We had a pay-as-you-go system from the 1930s until about the mid-1990s. And they had never been funded actuarially at all. We have a big balloon payment in 2032, thanks to an agreement that John Rowland made back in the 1990s that had a 20-year agreement on health and pension benefits with state employees. Governor Malloy did open up the contract in 2011, which created the Tier 3 employees, and also made very important changes to these health and pension benefits, which meant that those employees had to pay more into their health and pension benefits as well, which is projected to save $21 billion over 20 years. So there's some sort of a memory lapse by certain people who say that we're not doing anything when we're paying over $1 billion a year basically to pay for Tier 1, and we've been paying $250 million per year to make sure that we are fully funded actuarially for Tier 2, Tier 2A, and Tier 3. I just wonder where all those folks were under the previous 2 administrations when they were totally underfunding the liabilities, not paying down the debt like we are right now.
Mr. Ellis?
Well, I think it's, I wasn't there, but the Democrats have been in charge of the House and the Senate for 40 years. John Rowland did the deal. That's great. As Bob mentioned, in 2011, there was a opportunity to do something with CBAC. We were going to get $1.8 billion in savings. We got 620. But the fact of the matter is, when Bob says that it was a bad deal by John Rowland, if it was such a bad deal, why did you add 5 more years to it? It would have been up in 2017. Right now, we'd be discussing the CBAC pension for health care. We'd be talking about it right now, and it would be a third rail going into this year. But they added 5 more years to it. If it was such a bad deal, why do you add 5 more years? We didn't get as much of the savings that was initially reported, 1.8. We got 620 million. So we were always paying $1 billion. Bob's right. But the fact of the matter is, we're in a position where everybody knew that it was a bad deal. Why did you add another 5 years to it? We didn't get the savings. We didn't get what we should have gotten. And that, in my opinion, it doesn't matter who was in leadership when the deal was done. It matters who was there in 2011 when it was renegotiated and they decided to add 5 more years. That, to me, is a question that you all have to think about.
Any rebuttal?
Yes, because most of this is not even relevant to fact, what you're saying. The fact is that the governor opened up the contract with state employees. The legislature does not open up contracts with state employees. The executive branch does, no matter who it is. Governor Rell actually made some minor changes back in, I think it was 2009, where she negotiated some changes that have some minor long-term effects, but yet also didn't have a $100 million deposit into the pension plan. But I guess my time's up. But this is an important subject for us to talk about because
Time, I'm afraid.
We have to move on, I guess. Yep.
Sorry. Unless you both want, do you want to do anything further on this?
Maybe move on.
All right, we will move on. This next question goes to Mr. Ellers first. What, if anything, would you do to encourage the Department of Transportation to reevaluate the $1 billion Metro North Walk Bridge project?
Well, it's a good one, especially for everybody in this room. I've been here for a few other meetings. So the walk bridge is an interesting public issue here in town, and it comes down to a couple of things. A, transparency with respect to how this whole process is going. And I've spent time with people in the East Norwalk Business Association. I've talked to a lot of different people regarding the issue. And Jim Himes, who was at an East Norwalk Business Association Meet the Candidate night, specifically said at one point, look, I called the mayor and I told him we can change the navigation on the river. Changing the navigation on the river would allow the bridge to be a fixed bridge. Fixed bridge costs $185 million less, at least by the proposals that were up here on the wall. We're looking at getting $200 million because of, from Sandy, from some government federal grant. But the fact of the matter is, we can afford a Volkswagen and our state's not in that good a shape. And what we're trying to do is borrow money, get a Range Rover bridge, and we can't afford that. We can afford a fixed bridge. We can do this so it doesn't disrupt the downtown area for as long as it has been. And the reality of it all is, folks, what happens with the length of time to build this bridge, what happens to the community? What happens to the economic environment down there? I'm for the fixed bridge, but what I'm really for is I'm for more transparency on how this whole thing gets done. We've read it enough in the newspapers. We've had enough discourse about it. Every time I hear something new, people get more confused. There has not been enough discussion regarding the fixed bridge. There has not been enough discussion about what's financially in the best interest not only of the state, because we don't have the money, and for the community here together.
Thank you. Mr. Duff?
Thank you. It's one of those things that concerns me when I hear people paraphrase what other people said, because sometimes it's not always accurate. I actually spoke to Congressman Himes today and said, what did you say at that meeting? And he said, I absolutely did not say that I could make this a non-navigable waterway. He said what he claims he said was that if that was something the city wanted to pursue, then that would be something that he would pursue in a way through the Army Corps of Engineers and through that whole process, which could take multiple years to actually make it a non-navigable waterway. So it's not exactly as was said, nor is it meant to be as simple as was suggested. We all know that the walk bridge is going to be a big project in Norwalk, and it has been my role, working together closely with the mayor, to make sure that we are protecting Norwalk businesses. We have many federal agencies that are working on this, and so for us, we have been working very closely with area businesses, the Maritime Aquarium, Spinnaker, and various folks who are interested parties there to minimize the impact that we have for them and help them transition because of this large project. Every time on the Northeast Corridor that Amtrak is stopped because of the fact of the walk bridge being stuck open, costs the regional economy about $100 million. So we know that this bridge is going to get done. Continuing to say that it can be welded shut is a fairy tale, because that's not going to happen, and it has been represented multiple times to not just me but to other elected officials as well that is not going to happen that way. And the reason why some of the costs are expanding is because the project is expanding to do work that has already been on the books, such as the East Avenue Bridge, 4 Point Street Bridge, Saugatuck Avenue Bridge, doing the turnaround over by the transfer station, and other things like that.
Any rebuttal?
We've known the bridges need to be done for a long time, years, and now we're still discussing it. It's another question about priority. It's another discussion about planning. I know what I heard from Jim Himes. I know what the other people there heard. It might be wordsmith, but the fact of the matter is this is not a transparent process that we're going through.
Anything further?
Well, I would say that we have worked very closely, the mayor and I and other elected officials on this process, and that the DOT has worked with area businesses. And to come in kind of at the last minute and say this has been a flawed process or this has not been a transparent process isn't the case. I've been working with various groups now for up to 2 years since the grant was announced. It's a federal Sandy grant, and we're going to work with them and work with the state in order to minimize, but also make sure that we have a bridge that works and operates and doesn't strand people.
Thank you, that's time. Next question goes to Mr. Duff first. There are groups that operate in state legislatures around the country, sending model legislation to state representatives and senators. If this type of organization were to approach you with a model bill and ask you to support or sponsor it, how would you respond?
Well, I guess it depends on what group it is. There's groups out there like ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, that I don't agree with, and I think that works with the Koch brothers and Karl Rove and other types of folks that I philosophically disagree with, that put together model legislation that many other state legislatures around the country put forward. So I reject those kinds of bills that come out. Now there's model legislation that we've done with AARP, with the CARE Act, that actually helps senior citizens and their families when a loved one gets out of the hospital. They've been pushing that nationally. And those types of bills are good bills to look at. Also, if there's environmental legislation that could help Connecticut or that could help clean up our environment or help grow jobs, I'm all for those things. But we have to be very careful about the various groups that are out there that say, I have a bill for you, and this is going to help Connecticut. If there are groups that take money from folks like the Koch brothers and take money from Karl Rove and his associates, I'm not interested.
Mr. Ehlers.
Do I get to mention George Soros, Bob?
Hold it.
Look, there's all sorts of ways that legislation get done. But the fact of the matter is, I'm an outsider. I'm not an insider. I don't have all the answers for everything, and I'm never going to have the answers for them. But what I am going to do is I'm going to listen to people. I'm going to listen to different organizations, regardless of which side of the aisle they're on. Because at the end of the day, what everybody in this room, what everybody in Norwalk cares about is, what are you guys doing for me? Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that anybody is going to have the best idea, but the fact of the matter is you could have somebody, George Soros, good guy, I guess, can come with a good idea, and I might not like it, but it might spur my thinking in terms of what might be better legislation. So I'm not one of those people that's going to put the blinder on to somebody on the left just because they're on the left. Because there's very smart people on both sides of the aisle. That's the problem that we have, and Bob started out with it with respect to discourse. Here's the deal, folks. There's 80% of everything that we're going to agree upon when it comes to what we want. We want a place to live. We want to have a job. We want our homes to be safe. We want our GDP to grow. We're going to all agree on 80% of the things that are there. But the 10% on the left and the 10% on the right, you're not going to like me because I got a blue shirt on. I'm not going to like you because you have a white shirt on, but I'm not going to define you by the color of your shirt. And that's the difference of being able to have the ability to actually listen to everybody and their ideas. That's the problem that we've got in Hartford. We've just got 5 guys up there that are making all the decisions. That's not how we get legislation done, and your tax dollars are not benefiting from that. That's why I'm here today. That's my frustration, and that's your frustration as well.
Any rebuttal?
Yeah, I'm glad he's frustrated because he doesn't understand the process at all. And the fact that saying that 5 guys make decisions is completely untrue and factually incorrect. When I was chair of the Housing Committee and chair of the Banks Committee and chair of the Energy and Technology Committee, we did complicated legislation, whether it was saving people from their homes, whether it was putting together energy policy that helped folks in the state of Connecticut, help businesses. And I did that in a very bipartisan way. Most of the very complicated legislation I did was 100% unanimous.
Time. Anything further?
Bipartisan doesn't include the budget. It's one-sided.
All right, I'm going to make this next question the last one before closing. It will go to Mr. Ellers first. Connecticut has been and will continue to be in a fiscal crisis for the foreseeable future. How do you propose specifically to reduce the budget deficit and its impact on Norwalk?
Firm spending caps. They were introduced 25 years ago when we had the first state income tax. We aren't holding to the spending caps. We need to have absolute and full disclosure for the budget. Every part of the budget needs to have a majority vote on the floor. That's not the case currently. 30% of your tax dollars go to part of the budget that is not voted on the floor. It's not open. That has to happen. We have to redirect the way that we're doing our taxing in this state. We're taxing everybody out, picking the winners and the losers. We're spending money on companies that are forced, we're paying them to stay here. That's on the backs of all of us small business people here in the community. We need to cut our corporate taxes. We need to minimize our tax situation so we can grow our economy. The economy grows with new business and ingenuity and organic growth. That's actually not what's happening right now. We aren't getting enough new businesses started because we saw again today that our tax receipts missed by $77 million just through the end of the quarter. That's because our business isn't as vibrant as it is in other states. That vibrancy is due to the way that we run our state. We lack predictability, we lack transparency, and we lack accountability. So that's how we're going to address the issue. Predictability, accountability, and transparency.
All right, Mr. Duff.
Thank you. Well, we're working very hard to make sure that we make ends meet and that we have balanced budgets. We have actually cut spending to the tune of about $4.5 billion over the last 5 years, $1.4 billion over the last 2 years. We are growing jobs in this state. We are bringing companies in like Henkel. We are have agreements with companies like Sikorsky, Pratt & Whitney, Electric Boat that are growing thousands of jobs. 2 years ago, last year was the first year that we saw an increase in manufacturing, advanced manufacturing jobs. So we are poised, I believe, to grow over the next generation for jobs in the state. We do have to do it organically, and we do have to bring in jobs from other states, which we have been doing. We brought in NBC Universal, Comcast, HomeServe. Data was growing very, very big. So I think that a lot of the work we have been doing over the last 5 years is working, and it is showing results. And our receipts are growing, and we will continue to grow as well. So I feel very bullish on the future. I'm not in the rooting for failure club that I think others are as well.
Any rebuttal?
No.
All right. In that case, by luck of the draw, we now go to closing statements, and Mr. Duff gets a 2-minute close. There will be no rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and thanks again to everybody for coming today. I think that folks know that I've worked very hard over the years and been elected, I've been honored to serve the people of Norwalk and Darien. You know me, I'm in the community, I'm approachable and responsive, and that I've been helping constituents, thousands of constituents every year, whether it's big issues such as helping to pass good laws that affect Norwalk and Darien, whether it's helping constituents on their various issues with maybe state agencies, or bringing home millions of dollars in state aid. We've had a 15.6% increase in state aid over the last 2 years to Norwalk. So I think all those things are success stories, and the fact that Norwalk is growing right now, I think there's a good urban core, and that there's no redevelopment project in Norwalk that doesn't have some sort of state assistance on it. I still love this job. I still love standing up for you, and as Majority Leader, I've been able to ensure that Norwalk receives more funding and grants for projects. Grants such as Lockwood Matthews Mansion, the Maritime Aquarium, Mill Hill, the Marvin, Ludlow Manor, and many others as well. We know we have challenges, but so do other states, and we're going to work and we're going to meet those challenges and work through them. I do sincerely believe that our future is bright and that the seeds of our investments are starting to spread. Again, we have Sikorsky and Henkel and NBC Sports, Comcast, Data that are growing, and we're continuing to do that. Our crime is down. We're creating bioscience clusters. We have lots of good things that are happening all over the state of Connecticut. And we have a great quality of life that is really unmatched by any other state. So with that, I respectfully ask for your support on Election Day and in the honor to serve 2 more years as your state senator. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ellers.
You know what the definition of insanity is? Doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different outcome. That's where we are. We're raising taxes, we're missing budgets, we're having to pay people to stay here and work. We continually hear how expensive our state is to work in. We heard that from Sikorsky. That comes down to the simple question, do we have to keep doing the same thing over and over again and looking for a different outcome? My answer to that is no. That's why I'm sitting here today. I'm sitting here because I'm tired of the same outcome. Higher taxes, higher property taxes due to the fact that our towns get less money. I mean, people that aren't able to have the same opportunities that they're having in other states. The people that have the ability and a mobility to leave, our environment for business. We're not open for business, folks. We're open only if we ask the taxpayers, all of us, to keep jobs here. We're not open for business. That's not how we are going to grow things organically. We have to get a proper business practice. And the proper business practice comes with less regulation, less fees. We have too much on the backs of our business people, too much on the backs of all of our citizens. And that's not how we're going to get to the next century where all of our children are going to be able to stay here and foster like we have for the last few decades. It's about the next 20 years. It's not about me. It's about your children and my children. I want them to be able to stay here and prosper like I did. And the direction of just continuing this role of insanity, it doesn't work. We need a change in leadership. That's why I'm here. I'm asking you to support me. I will stand up for you. But I'm going to tell you when I'm wrong, and I'm going to tell you when I made mistakes. We don't hear enough of that today. It's about accountability, and I've got it.
It's time. Thank you both.